For thousands of years, long before the rise of pyramids, before the first cities of Mesopotamia, before the great civilizations of Egypt, humans were already living in the vast lands we now call North America. They hunted mammoths across frozen plains, they crossed glaciers and mountains, they built cultures that would survive for millennia. But here's the mystery. For more than a century, scientists believed they knew exactly how the first people arrived here. A simple story. A land bridge, a migration from Siberia, and a journey into a new world. But today, that story is falling apart. New discoveries are rewriting everything we thought we knew. Ancient footprints, hidden settlements, genetic clues buried deep in DNA. Each discovery reveals something unexpected, something older, something that shouldn't exist. Because according to some of the newest evidence, humans may have reached the Americas thousands of years earlier than we ever imagined. And the deeper scientists dig, the stranger the story becomes. The Ice Age world. To understand this mystery, we must travel back more than 20,000 years. The planet looked very different then. Much of the northern hemisphere was buried under massive sheets of ice. Glaciers covered huge parts of Canada, stretching for thousands of kilometers. Sea levels were dramatically lower. Entire continents were connected by land that is now underwater. And between Asia and North America, something extraordinary appeared. A vast frozen landmass called Beringia. Today, this area lies beneath the waters of the Bering Strait, but during the Ice Age, it was a massive land bridge, nearly 1,000 kilometers wide. Not just a narrow crossing, but an entire ecosystem. Grasslands stretched across the horizon, herds of mammoths wandered the plains, giant bison and woolly rhinos roamed the landscape, and humans followed them. For decades, scientists believed this was the moment when the first people entered the Americas. Around 13,000 years ago, hunters crossed this land bridge and spread rapidly southward. This became known as the Clovis culture. For a long time, the Clovis people were thought to be the very first Americans. But then, archaeologists began finding something that shouldn't exist. Artifacts that were older than Clovis. Much older, and suddenly the timeline of human history in the Americas began to unravel. The site that changed everything. In the 1970s, archaeologists made an astonishing discovery in southern Chile, a place known as Monteverde. At first glance, it didn't look dramatic. No towering ruins, no massive temples, just a muddy site filled with ancient wooden remains. But when scientists began studying the artifacts, they found something impossible. The settlement dated back more than 14,500 years. That was 1,500 years older than the Clovis culture. For decades, many scientists refused to believe it. The discovery challenged everything textbooks had taught for generations. If Monteverde was truly that old, then humans must have arrived in the Americas far earlier than anyone believed. Eventually, the evidence became undeniable. The site contained ancient tools, animal bones, food remains, even preserved wooden structures. This wasn't a temporary camp, it was a real settlement, and its age meant something incredible. By 14,500 years ago, people had already traveled all the way to the southern tip of South America, which raised a massive question. If humans were already in Chile by that time, when did they first arrive in North America? And how did they get there so quickly? The footprints in the desert. In 2021, scientists made a discovery that shocked the archaeological world. Deep within White Sands National Park in New Mexico, they found something extraordinary. Human footprints.
thousands of them, preserved in layers of ancient sediment. At first, researchers assumed they were a few thousand years old, but when the sediment was carefully dated, the results were astonishing. The footprints were nearly 23,000 years old. That meant humans were walking through this region during the height of the Ice Age, at a time when massive glaciers blocked much of the northern continent. According to older migration theories, this should have been impossible, because the ice sheets would have made travel into North America extremely difficult. Yet here were clear human footprints. Children, teenagers, adults, entire families moving through the landscape thousands of years earlier than expected. Some prints even show children playing in the mud. Others reveal people carrying heavy loads. A glimpse into a day in the life of people who lived here 23 millennia ago. And suddenly, the story of how the Americas were populated became far more mysterious. Because if humans were already here during the Ice Age, then the journey into the New World must have begun much earlier. A journey along the edge of the world. So how did they arrive? If glaciers blocked the interior of the continent, there may have been another route, one that followed the edge of the Pacific Ocean. Scientists call it the coastal migration theory. Instead of crossing through icy corridors in the interior, early humans may have traveled along the coastline, moving slowly by boat, fishing, hunting marine animals, and following rich coastal ecosystems southward. But there's a problem. Most of those ancient coastal sites would now be underwater, because since the end of the Ice Age, sea levels have risen 120 meters. Entire prehistoric coastlines are now submerged beneath the ocean, which means many of the earliest human settlements may still be hidden beneath the waves, waiting to be discovered.
Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. The genetic puzzle. For decades, archaeologists searched the ground for clues: stone tools, bones, ancient campsites. But in the last 20 years, a completely different type of evidence began to change the story: DNA. Tiny fragments of genetic material preserved inside ancient bones were revealing something extraordinary about the first peoples of the Americas. Scientists discovered that the ancestors of Native Americans were closely related to populations from Northeast Asia. But the genetic picture wasn't simple. It showed something strange. The DNA suggested that the ancestors of Native Americans didn't just pass quickly through the land bridge of Beringia. Instead, they may have stayed there for thousands of years. Researchers call this idea the Beringian standstill. According to this theory, a small population became isolated in Beringia during the last Ice Age, cut off from Asia by glaciers, cut off from the Americas by massive ice sheets. For thousands of years, they lived in this frozen region between continents, hunting, adapting, surviving. During this time, their genetic identity slowly changed. They became a unique population, distinct from both Asian and later Native American groups. Then, sometime between 16,000 and 20,000 years ago, something happened. The ice began to retreat. New pathways opened, and these people began moving south into an entirely new continent. But even this theory may not tell the full story, because some genetic discoveries have raised an even deeper mystery: the ghost population. In 2013, scientists analyzing ancient DNA made a discovery that stunned researchers. The genetic ancestry of Native Americans included traces of something unexpected: a mysterious population known as ancient North Eurasians. These people lived in parts of Siberia more than 24,000 years ago. But their DNA wasn't purely East Asian.
Instead, it showed links to ancient populations that once lived across Eurasia. In other words, the ancestors of Native Americans were not simply one group migrating from Asia. They were the result of multiple ancient populations mixing together. One of the most famous examples comes from a remarkable discovery near Lake Baikal. Scientists analyzed the DNA of a boy who lived 24,000 years ago. Today, he is known as the Malta Boy. His genetic signature showed surprising similarities to both Europeans and Native Americans. This meant that the ancestors of Native Americans carried genetic heritage from two distant worlds: ancient Siberian hunters and populations related to people who once lived far to the west. How these groups mixed together remains one of the most fascinating puzzles in human history. But the mysteries didn't stop there, because sometimes the clues come from a single skeleton hidden for thousands of years. The Spirit Cave Revelation. In the Nevada desert, archaeologists discovered human remains inside a cave that would become one of the most controversial finds in American archaeology. The site was called Spirit Cave. The remains were extremely old, more than 10,000 years. But when scientists first studied the skeleton in the 1940s, something seemed unusual. The skull shape looked different from what researchers expected. Some experts even suggested the remains might belong to a population unrelated to modern Native American groups. For decades, the skeleton became the center of intense debate. But in 2018, new technology finally allowed scientists to extract ancient DNA from the remains. The results were clear. The individual from Spirit Cave was directly related to modern Native American populations. This discovery confirmed something important. Despite physical differences in ancient skeletons, the genetic continuity between early Americans and modern indigenous peoples was strong. In other words, the first Americans were not some mysterious lost race. They were the ancestors of Native Americans living today. But even as genetic science answered some questions, archaeology continued uncovering new mysteries. Because the deeper scientists look into the past, the earlier humans seem to appear. The mystery of the first tools. For years, the Clovis culture was considered the beginning of human history in the Americas. Clovis tools are famous for their distinctive design: long spear points made from stone, perfectly shaped and razor-sharp. These tools were ideal for hunting massive Ice Age animals like mammoths and giant bison. Clovis technology spread rapidly across North America around 13,000 years ago. But then, archaeologists started finding something surprising: older tools, different tools, tools that didn't resemble Clovis technology at all. Some of the most intriguing discoveries came from Paisley Caves in Oregon. Here, researchers uncovered human artifacts and DNA dating back more than 14,000 years. Another mysterious site lies in Texas. At a location called Gault Site, archaeologists discovered thousands of tools that appear to be older than Clovis. These artifacts suggest that different groups of people may have entered the Americas using multiple migration waves, not just one. Each group bringing its own technology, its own traditions, its own way of surviving in an unfamiliar land. But perhaps the most astonishing discoveries are happening today, beneath the ocean, because some scientists believe the earliest American settlements are still hidden underwater. The lost coastlines of the Ice Age. Today, the coastlines of North America look familiar: rocky cliffs, sandy beaches, busy ports and cities. But during the last Ice Age, the world's coastlines were completely different. Sea levels were dramatically lower. So low, in fact, that vast areas of land now hidden under the ocean were once dry ground. Ancient rivers flowed across plains that are now underwater. Entire ecosystems existed where waves crash today. For early humans migrating along the Pacific coast, these submerged landscapes would have been perfect places to live. Rich marine environments provided fish, shellfish, seals, and seabirds. Food was abundant. Travel along the coastline was easier than crossing frozen glaciers. But here's the problem. As the Ice Age ended and glaciers melted, sea levels rose rapidly. Over thousands of years, the ocean swallowed these ancient shorelines. Many of the earliest human camps may now lie hundreds of meters beneath the sea, which means the first chapter of human history in the Americas might be hidden under the Pacific Ocean. Scientists are now using underwater archaeology and sonar mapping to search these lost landscapes, and some believe the most important discoveries about early Americans may still be waiting below the waves.
The Mastodon Mystery. In Florida, a surprising discovery has raised new questions about how early humans interacted with Ice Age animals. At a site called Page-Ladson Site, archaeologists uncovered the bones of a mastodon. Mastodons were enormous prehistoric relatives of modern elephants. They roamed much of North America during the Ice Age. But this particular skeleton showed something unusual. Embedded in the bones were marks made by stone tools. The animal had clearly been butchered by humans. When scientists dated the site, the results were astonishing. The mastodon had been killed nearly 14,500 years ago. This pushed evidence of human activity in the region far earlier than many researchers once believed. It also showed that early Americans were already hunting and processing massive Ice Age animals. But discoveries like this raise another important question. If humans were present across the continent this early, then their arrival must have happened much earlier still. And that leads to one of the most controversial discoveries ever made in American archaeology: the Cerruti Mastodon controversy. In California, construction workers made an unexpected discovery while building a highway. They uncovered ancient bones belonging to a mastodon. The site eventually became known as the Cerruti Mastodon Site. At first, it seemed like a typical paleontological find. But when scientists studied the bones more closely, they noticed something remarkable. The bones appeared to have been deliberately broken. Large stones nearby looked like hammer tools. Some researchers suggested that humans may have smashed the bones to extract marrow. But the real shock came from the dating results. The site appeared to be around 130,000 years old. If that interpretation were correct, it would completely rewrite human history, because modern humans were not believed to be present in the Americas anywhere near that time. The claim immediately sparked intense debate. Some scientists believe natural processes could explain the broken bones. Others argue the evidence suggests very early human activity. For now, the site remains controversial, but it highlights an important truth. Our understanding of early human migration is still evolving, and sometimes discoveries challenge even the most established ideas. The mystery of ancient Brazil. Another controversial story comes from Brazil. Deep inside the rocky landscapes of Serra da Capivara National Park, archaeologists discovered hundreds of ancient rock shelters. The region contains thousands of prehistoric paintings, scenes of hunting, animals, human figures. But the real mystery lies in the age of the site. Some researchers claim evidence here may date back more than 20,000 years, and possibly even older. If correct, this would suggest humans reached South America far earlier than most traditional models allow. However, the findings remain controversial.
Some scientists question whether the artifacts were truly made by humans. Others argue that natural fires or geological processes may have created similar traces. The debate continues today. But discoveries like this remind us that the story of the first Americans is far from settled. Every year, new evidence emerges that forces historians to reconsider what we thought we knew. The giants of the Ice Age. When the first people entered the Americas, they stepped into a world filled with enormous animals, creatures unlike anything alive today. Across the plains of North America, herds of woolly mammoth roamed the grasslands. Massive American mastodons wandered through ancient forests. Towering, giant ground sloth moved slowly across the landscape. Some stood more than 6 meters tall. There were also terrifying predators: the razor-toothed smilodon, the powerful dire wolf, and the massive short-faced bear, one of the largest land predators ever known. For early humans, survival required extraordinary skill. They developed sophisticated hunting strategies, stone tools, cooperative group tactics, and deep knowledge of the environment. Yet within a few thousand years, many of these giant animals disappeared forever. Why this happened remains another mystery. Some scientists believe climate change played the main role. Others argue that human hunting may have pushed these species toward extinction. The truth may involve a combination of both. But the disappearance of these Ice Age giants forever changed the ecosystems of the Americas, and it marked a new chapter in human history on the continent. Across the vast landscapes of North America and South America, the traces of the first people are still there, hidden beneath deserts, buried under forests, locked inside caves and ancient sediments. For thousands of years, these clues waited silently. A footprint pressed into ancient mud, a stone tool dropped beside a hunting ground, a fragment of bone carrying the memory of a life lived 20,000 years ago. Each discovery adds another piece to a puzzle that scientists are still trying to understand. Once, the story seemed simple. People crossed the Ice Age land bridge of Bering from Asia and spread south across a new continent. But the deeper researchers look, the more complicated the story becomes. Sites like Monte Verde in Chile show humans living at the far end of the continent far earlier than expected. Ancient footprints discovered in White Sands National Park suggest people were already walking across North America during the height of the Ice Age. And genetic discoveries reveal a complex ancestry connecting ancient populations across Siberia, Beringia, and the Americas. The journey of the first Americans was not a single migration. It was a long story of exploration, survival, and adaptation. Small groups moving across frozen plains, families traveling along ancient coastlines, hunters following the great herds of the Ice Age. Over thousands of years, these early people spread across 2 continents. They built cultures, they developed languages, they created traditions that would shape the history of the Americas for millennia. Yet many questions remain unanswered. How early did humans truly arrive? Did multiple migrations shape the first populations? How many ancient settlements still lie hidden beneath forests, deserts, or even beneath the ocean? Every year, new technologies bring us closer to the answers. Satellite imaging, DNA analysis, underwater archaeology. Each discovery revealing fragments of a story older than written history itself. But perhaps the most powerful truth is this: the first Americans were not just explorers crossing into an empty world. They were the ancestors of the Native American peoples whose cultures and traditions continue today. Their story did not end thousands of years ago. It continues, in languages still spoken, in knowledge passed from generation to generation, and in the landscapes where their ancestors once walked. The mysteries of the first Americans may never be fully solved, but every discovery brings us one step closer to understanding one of humanity's greatest journeys, a journey that began more than 15,000 years ago.